Well, welcome everybody to the Planning Commission meeting on Thursday, May 10th. First item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
All right. Agenda's approved. Any comment?
Only thing was that Dean and I talked a little bit about the housing committee had 3 or 4 items that they wanted kind of to say, okay, is this what you want us to do next? I thought we could just mention that when I'm talking about the housing section as well.
Certainly. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it'll just be
Okay.
included in there.
All right. Okay, so all in favor of the agenda as written with that modification? Aye.
Aye.
All right. So the agenda approved. Next item is approval of the minutes from the meeting on the 26th. A motion to approve those minutes. All right. So Stephen moves. Second by Susanna. All right. Any discussion? I enjoyed reading them. I actually did not have any comments.
Yeah, no,
Jane, yeah.
I like reading them because we had to catch up on what I
Right?
missed. It was good.
And Mary did a fantastic job. So any discussion on any of the minutes? All right. Well, that'll be quick. It's my electric voice. Okay, so the next item is any disclosures relating to any potential conflicts of interest.
We have to all say aye on the,
Yes, we should. Thank you. This is good vice chair already.
Yeah, there you go.
Love it. Okay, all in favor of approval of the minutes from the 26th?
aye.
Aye. All right. So now we can move on to disclosures. Any disclosures relating to anything on the agenda tonight?
No.
Seeing none. Next is open to the public. If there's any comments unrelated to any of the topics that we'll get to. Perfect. All right. Then, okay, we can get right into it. The comprehensive plan, the first topic was growth and development. And do you want to do the housing committee future comments just after we get through these sections, or?
Yeah, just probably while we're talking about the housing section.
Sure.
Since it's related.
Okay, perfect.
I have paper copies if anybody wants the paper copies. But you grab them?
Yeah, got them. All right, any general thoughts on going through it, or do you just want to dive in with
Well, I
comments?
mean, the only thing I think was, I even called Dean to just kind of take his temperature on how to do it, because one of my tasks was, we talked a little bit about numbers of people or numbers of housing units, and trying to peg it to a number seemed like pretty arbitrary. So then I just settled to this idea of a range. So you can see I said 25 to 50, where I think we had talked about 45 new units. And so I guess I throw that out there to just make sure that conforms with what other people feel like is a good way to attack it. So rather than a hard number of people or a hard number of units, we know things fluctuate tremendously, right? But there's some sense of kind of a high end, but it's probably going to be in that range. If the Quiniasca development, kicks off in earnest, you're probably going to be at that. It's going to fill up
Quickly.
right away.
Right.
But on some other years, we may be below the floor of 25.
Yeah, I did have a question around that, more around this came up in the energy subcommittee last night as well. I know that we're going to have a section for definitions, or at least historically there is a place, and I feel like dwelling units is something that we might want to define.
Okay.
Because when I was reading that and recognizing our discussions we had talked about people and then talked about going to dwelling units, which I think makes perfect sense, but does a dwelling unit, could that be a single room apartment, or a rental room in a house, or the whole house, or
Yeah,
do we need to quantify it?
I just know it's quantified a little bit in the housing section where they talk about a unit of elder or group housing is considered 2/5 of a dwelling unit. So
Right.
there's that little piece is defined, but I would agree the rest is a little vague. So Yeah, that's a fair point.
Can you point out where that is? I was just looking for it.
The
Should
two
we put a,
fifths? Yeah,
should we put
that's-
a reference in there more?
So it's in
Concept of dwelling
objective
unit,
number
more fleshed
3
out or
in
something?
housing, the last line in objective number 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
There, yeah.
I was just saying it might be nice to refer to, you know, say C housing section for
Yeah.
more information on what a dwelling unit is. Because I think this is actually a really good point, because I actually attended as did Dean, a thing on the housing, affordable housing issues and, you know, ideas and what other municipalities are doing, et cetera. We're just kind of getting started on this. And one of the things that was, you know, consistently recognized everywhere is that the need is growing for housing of all kinds, but especially affordable housing, because more and more people are living either alone or in smaller units. So the overall amount of housing units is increasing, even though, you know, maybe the population size is not increasing that much. So I think the dwelling unit thing is pretty important.
And in that case, and I don't know that it needs to happen here necessarily, although it would be great to get thoughts. There is that reference of the elderly housing is 2/5 of a dwelling unit, but then I'm still not clear on what actually a dwelling unit is, other than in a base of elderly housing.
Yeah, I agree. And I think in housing, you know, they go in a little more detail around what workforce housing is and some other details, but I'm happy to try and, you know, take that as a to-do and figure that out. And then in growth and development, you know, like we said, we could do 25 to 50 new dwelling units with a footnote or an asterisk, or, you know, some way to reference that is defined more concretely in the housing section. I mean, the footnote could just define a dwelling unit too, I suppose, but.
Yeah, my intent isn't to put that on you, which I guess is to solicit discussion. I'm not quite sure how that would be quantified. Like, would we say that there's a dwelling unit we're just saying is a place where one or more people reside, and then we could have fractions for the points of if it's an elderly housing unit or if it's an affordable housing unit, if that is something we want to somehow weight heavier? Because we already had metrics around that, like the 10% of growth.
Yeah, I mean, the low-income housing or affordable housing, workforce housing has more to do with like the cost or the economic, like the salary or the earnings of the people. But so, I mean, they're separate, right? That's
Because you can have
but-
high-end housing that's pretty dense, like in
Right.
collective.
I mean, I guess I'd ask you, is there any standard definition of a housing unit?
Well, think of a housing unit as being something that can be very varied, and a housing unit could range.
Like a
think
studio
about-
apartment to a
Yeah, exactly.
five bedroom, 5 bath
And the-
house.
And the meeting that Kate and I went to, I don't know if this was before you got there or after, someone in Williston was commenting that as part of their planning and regulatory system, they classify housing units differently. Although the interesting thing is that the reason we have this 2/5 in our plan is because the former Williston planner from many years ago, who's probably responsible ultimately for what Williston does now, was working for Shelburne when this idea got into the plan. It's basically recognizing that if we're trying to assess the impact of growth, not all housing units are the same.
Right.
And so we did it this way by just saying elderly housing is going to not count as quickly as a single-family home. But to answer your question, think of it's a place where a household resides. And there are certain types of households that are families. So families and households aren't exactly interchangeable. You could have a household of one, but it's a place where they reside. It's not congregate housing, so it's going to have the elements that you need to live. Place to sleep, place to bathe, place to prepare food, and so on. I just want to make sure that we're starting to talk about growth, but it's going to bring in housing. And do we want to talk about housing first? But yes, there could be a definition, although the plan hasn't customarily had a definition section. I mean, different philosophies about that, but I appreciate that people will need to know what we mean by a dwelling unit.
So for the purpose of growth and development, fair to just say that after that, we could say something like for definition or understanding of dwelling units, see the housing section as far as this goes, and then that can be, we can define that there. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or maybe you can just add housing units, you know, the impact on, their impacts on growth and development vary depending on what type of housing unit they are and, you know, who is living in them. And then just say for more information, just to kind of, you know, introduce the idea a little bit.
So dwelling unit is defined in the zoning as a structure or self-contained portion thereof containing complete housekeeping facilities for one family or household and having no enclosed space in common with any other dwelling unit. So that would range from an efficiency to a studio, to a 2-bedroom, to a 3-bedroom, to a house, attached, not attached.
Do you think it includes an ADU?
Sorry?
Does that also include an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit?
Yeah, that is a unit. It's a different flavor, but yes, because it has those elements. If it didn't have all the elements, then it would be part of the primary use.
So jumping back to growth and development, the only thing, most of it's pretty standard from what we did before, but I did want to call out that objective number 2, I added a new objective since the last time we talked to just, and very simply, just increase affordable housing and supportive job growth. So again, I was trying to figure out as much as the reason I ended up with both of these was to make sure as we sort of worked in one, there were going to be impacts to the other. So, you know, I started working on some of that in housing around the affordable housing and workforce housing. So I wanted to make sure that it was referenced here, and, you know, and why, right? That for businesses in town, I think I reference it more in the housing section, but you know, 83% of businesses in the area say that the lack of affordable housing is the biggest hindrance to growth for them as a business. So, you know, trying to do that here in growth and development to call that out, that housing is going to be a critical piece of that for Shelburne.
Yeah, definitely. I noticed that. That's good.
And then a lot of the rest that's kind of, you know, in green on my electronic copy and, you know, the funny color, that's stuff we work together with some of the other committees. So there's not, I mean, unless you guys have specific things you want to call out, those were the big pieces that I wanted to, you know, bring your eyes to.
Yeah, and as far as that, most of my comments were more, I mean, I like the structure and the content is great. I did have a question on the first objective, number 6. Mm-hmm. Not so much a question, it was just the way I was reading it was that recognizing that development can contribute to water pollution, erosion, and stormwater flow problems, and in response to increasing federal and state. I guess that's good. We ended up having a lot of discussion on the energy, around energy, where we started off by saying, you know, the state has goals and we need to hit these goals, whereas our intention is it's the right thing to do. It just happens to satisfy these goals. Like that,
Right.
that is a thing. And I think when I just read it out loud, it didn't strike me the same way, but it just felt like we were doing this in response to those things.
Well, there's the other thing I'd point out. There's some tension in this document, right, and in housing as well, because we want housing in support of job growth. We want to grow, but we also don't want to ruin what we've got and pollute water, and you know. So I mean, it's interesting as you're going through this. There's this push and pull of both things that, and trying to strike that kind of healthy balance between the two of them is tricky at times because, and I think. I mean, the document, that could be where, as it continues to go through iterations with us and the Planning Commission, you know, there's some politics that come into play as to which way does the thing get pulled. So I'm calling that out now, that inherent in the document as you read it throughout, there's definitely this sense of pulling you one way and then pulling you back the other way.
Good, it keeps people engaged.
Yeah.
Apparently, I just had to read it out loud to see
Right.
that it was fine.
Okay.
There's an Oxford comma here, if we're grammar nerds.
Yeah. I am.
The other one was on I had a comment on number 6, recommended action. Curious if that was if that was essentially included in number 1, but then I wasn't seeing I don't know if I was just reading it faster than I was soaking it up.
Yeah, I think it probably is redundant.
Like determining.
We sort of blew that one out in greater level of detail.
Which is completely fair.
Right.
And like we've talked about before, it's not like we're seeing the same thing over and over and over. Some
Right.
repetition is healthy. So that's good.
But I'll put a note to myself to maybe, I mean, theoretically that could probably be trimmed out.
To me, it says, you're saying, like, basically make sure we stay on track with this, like by monitoring from time to time. So-
Well, it's that idea of, whether it's school, stormwater, sewer, there's a couple things that become gating factors potentially. So that idea of just look, where are we? Are we on track? Are we close to maxing out some things? Obviously with the Quinniasca thing, it's been water, right? Access to the emergency backup water supply or whatever. So it's that sort of idea of.
Right. And then on the economic development session, you had it's in bold.
Yeah, that's I think just a remnant.
Oh, fair.
It wasn't something
okay.
I did. Yeah.
I didn't know if that was to prompt a discussion about.
No, I think that's just a
'cause it's all
historical.
referring to economic development,
Yeah.
which works.
I think it's like a whereas in the old legal, old documents
right.
kind of. Does that ring a bell for you? Why it was the
Vaguely,
yeah.
it was something like that.
Yeah.
Just, if I can interrupt with a quick follow-up to Kate's comment, about number 6, and contrasting 1 with 6, where 1 is about the studies and keeping on top of the changes in capacity, and 6 may be about something else, or maybe it's redundant. Is there an opportunity for 6 to be reworded to say something like periodically invest in the capacity of community facilities to ensure that they are consistent with recent? I mean, is there
Right.
the other half, the investment after you've done the study? I mean, is that kind of where you were going?
I actually like that idea.
It could also be a second, meaning periodically assess the capacity, blah, 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 period. If not keeping pace, something to the effect of investment could be mentioned there.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it before, but Kate's comment triggered the
Well,
idea.
something may come up that we haven't, but you can't, you try to do your very best to plan for everything, but stuff happens that is, unforeseen or whatever. And I think that,
Well, some of this is imposed on us. For example, with wastewater facilities, the permitting authorities tell us that when you get to 80% of your capacity under your permit, you have to start planning for your next upgrade. So there's pressure in different ways on the town to make those investments.
Could I just, instead of a period at the end, you could have just comma, well, you can see I added it here, I guess, and invest as necessary or something to that effect.
That works for me.
Okay.
That really covers a lot of stuff that's not mentioned in number 1, which
Right.
are specifically like safety and health kind of
Yeah.
things. But I do like having 6 as a separate one, like you're saying, Kate, because it does raise the topic of other things like parks and parking and all this stuff that doesn't require a force to man it or woman it or people it, whatever.
or we need, it's become apparent that we need a crosswalk or a sidewalk or a traffic light or something. It
Right.
just, facilitates stuff like that
Or a
happening.
new public beach or something.
All righty.
Yeah, I mean, the only other thing would be, Dick and Perry started with this document, so I inherited some of their things and agreed with a lot of them. You can still see, that some in here, well, I guess I'm not. Yeah, I mean, there's still some Dick comments, but while adhering to smart growth principles was something they had added, but it was in like small font, so I just capitalized it to fit, stylistically with the rest of it.
Would it be helpful just to accept all those things as we're going if we're not having any disagreement, and then it just cleans it up and
Yeah.
less for later?
Yeah, I mean, I left it all in there just so that you guys could see kind of
Right,
what had changed.
right.
But yeah, I mean, it's easy for me to do that for sure. I mean, I can just, there.
Cool.
That's why I'd rather work in this document this way than take notes on paper.
Right.
Dean, can I ask you a quick question? I'm just looking at some of the objectives on economic development. Is there a town professional whose role it is to seek out specific types of businesses, encourage people to come take a look at empty facilities and say, hey, we could really use a bagel shop, have you considered this?
Short answer is no, not someone who's focused on that. Former town managers, and I think more of Paul because he was here longer, Paul Boney, and because he had been a community development director in a previous life. I think he saw himself as that person. There were some economic development related studies that he was really the force behind, and I think he saw himself as wanting to do that, or he did want to do that. Several years ago, a former member of the Planning Commission who had been an economic development official in New Haven, Connecticut, was pushing for the plan to have language calling for an economic development person, and it got taken out of the plan. There was more pushback against that idea than I had ever imagined there would be. Could be time, but there have been economic development committees in the past. There was a push, I'll say, a year ago or so, to recreate an economic development committee that would do some of that. But then things just got crazy and busy, and it fell by the wayside.
It seems wise to include some language, whether it's a volunteer committee or a professional within the town, to be keeping an eye on desirable businesses and encouraging their location and welcoming them to Shelburne.
It would also be useful to have somebody providing us with feedback, like how effective are the regulations that we are creating in, enhancing this, or are we actually working against this in some way? Just to circle back to the Route 7 form-based code, I think one of the reasons that has not been quite as successful as some of us had hoped was because, it was adopted as an optional code, so it's confusing and, what is this? That's sort of the reaction, I think, of would-be developers. So a little more, consistency. And I think, to have somebody who has that skill set and can look at things through that lens would be very compelling to the select board, because, we did this because this has been identified as an underperforming part of town for years. So,
It would be bad of me to not also mention Ann Hogan. I was implying someone whose name is Sam Chauncey, and he was the one who had this idea. Ann Hogan, a former member of the Planning Commission, she did what we call the Biz Map, and that's a map that came about as a result of her and a small group compiling all these different databases of businesses and a survey. And so there were questions asked about, what could the town do? And that's just been long enough that it's off our radar a little bit. But that's the kind of thing that Joe was involved in as the manager, working with Ann when she did that, Anyway, I'll get that information. I'll get a copy of that survey out to all of you so that you see it. I hadn't thought about recirculating it.
I think Economic Development Committee or person, it's just an excellent idea, just from a proactive standpoint, like you're saying, to figure out what the town needs, and also to see what we're doing to prevent it, like you're saying, Kate. And that group could do the same thing. So can we put that, is there a way for us to put that in this document?
Yeah, I was just looking at where the best place to be, whether we wanted to,
Under recommended.
I mean, I think it's just a, fourth recommend action, or whether that would be above, but that's the place to put it.
Under that second,
Yeah, I mean,
the
Yeah.
economic development,
it's-
yeah.
I mean, it could be part of number
there.
1 too, right?
I mean, I guess the question is, are we trying to get the town to throw money at this? Or is this something like, is this a volunteer role, or is this a formal part of somebody's job, description?
The select board did this discussion that happened about a year ago happened at the select board level, and Jerry Story, who's now the chair, was really the main force behind it. So I think there would be some interest. My recollection is that when it was talked about, there had been mention of this idea of a person on staff, and I'm not sure that at that time there was complete agreement with that idea, and that they thought that the place to start would be with a committee, but it's a different board now.
Why don't we just recommend that, at the very least, we establish some kind of an economic development committee? We have a ton of
Perry would be.
we have venture capitalist people in this
Yeah.
town. We
Yeah.
have a lot of talent here that, yeah,
Association,
yeah.
is there not?
There is, there
Are
is.
you a part of that?
I think so.
Do you have a little sticker on your?
Well, that's what I was curious if they had some voice in trying to
Well, one of
attract.
the things that they do is the farmer's market. I mean, that's
Right.
something
Okay.
that falls under their sort of umbrella, and that has been probably the most visible and wildly successful. My understanding is we've put a couple of towns out of business with their farmers markets because
Really?
ours is so good. But yeah, I think it's time to kind of, but I think they've also been more focused on the individual businesses and what they could do to improve those. And this is something that maybe it sounds like a little more ambitious. Like, how could we, sort of promote Shelburne as a place of business in ways that maybe are new ways,
Well, also answer the call of the community. What do people want?
Yeah. And, if we are, serious about trying to get some affordable and transit-oriented housing, that happens through, kind of big business deals, right? So what's involved in attracting that, which, could lead to the recommendation, first thing you need to do is get the form-based zoning adopted as de facto. And there's some other things, there's TIF districts and other kinds of, tools that are available.
And Dina, I'm glad you just put that up on the board, because it looks like their objective is more around bringing together current businesses and facilitating that community, but it seems like it would be greatly beneficial to have a...
Well, they call out encouraging potential businesses and.
Oh, certainly, but
Yeah.
I think if you had a committee, subcommittee, whatever that form is, of town members that are seeking opportunities, like Perry was throwing stuff out left and right. You get those types of personalities that could then work with organizations like the Small Business Association, and seek those opportunities and help make connections and bring out ideas to the town. I think that's a good idea.
Well, for example, like one of the things we were looking at with the recent update to the form-based zoning was, marketing it and creating kind of cut sheets that would explain some of the advantages, I mean, that would be like fantastic for a group like that to take on. It's a little, maybe, too much of something for us to do.
Yeah.
Well, I think, like compared to the Small Business Association, this seems like it would have a different role. Because if it's a group of current businesses that are here, like, I'm not gonna, if I were in that meeting, I wouldn't say, let's go, bring in 6 more architects into this town. But a committee that's part of the town would say, like, we've got these businesses and they're not like really what we want quite yet. They're not like the quality that we want, or they're not quite, serving the need. They would have a more objective opinion, I think, and say, let's, actively seek out those things, kind of like a headhunter for businesses, rather than just a business association that's trying to protect, what we have already.
I mean, small example is just the museum bringing in Skinny Pancake. Like, that's
Yeah,
a win. That's
right.
great. And that kind of proactive, like, let's.
Right. And also, yeah, I mean, I could see you thinking about, okay, what do we feel like Shelburne's missing? What's the gap? Whether it's from a restaurant sort of portfolio standpoint, or what are the things that we're having to leave town for that could be here?
Right.
So I just started, if you,
And presumably,
Can you scroll
residential
to
landlords
recommended
also
actions?
are motivated to solve that problem too. So
and
maybe
that's the
it's
other thing we
working
need to,
with them.
where am I?
Oh, we're
Yeah.
next, just above
So
community
I'm on
utilities
page
facilities.
43.
Yeah.
Yeah, so up a little ways.
There we go, just above that, Dean.
Yeah, so I don't know if this is kind of what we're trying to get at, to create a town committee tasked with attracting new business to Shelburne and eliminating barriers to entry for new business. Doesn't work exactly.
Examining barriers?
Right,
Yeah.
yeah. Sure.
Identifying.
Because there are some businesses that I know our town does not want.
Right.
So you don't necessarily want to eliminate all the barriers.
Well, that's what I was trying to figure out, how Stephen was talking about sort of quality, like how do I put that in there? Like,
I think Kate was just about to say something like, not just attracting new businesses, but identifying what businesses are needed
right.
as like a third part of that.
Right. So.
Well, I
right.
think, right.
Because, one of the things that I think personally is very underleveraged is that, we have the 3 top tourism venues in the state in our town. And, we kind of set the bar a little low in terms of some of the,
I can't
businesses that we tend to get excited about. And, it's well known that people tend to eat and, they do that where they stay, and so there are all these weddings the entire summer. It's just nonstop weddings at the farm and the museum, but all those people stay in Burlington, and so presumably they're eating and spending money and all that stuff that is easy to do on Church Street. There, what if I think we should be kind of trying to get a little of that for ourselves.
How does that work? Create a town committee tasked with identifying businesses that Shelburne needs and then attracting them to Shelburne.
That's great.
We suggest Perry Gagliardi for
We do.
chair of the committee,
Yes, we do.
in case he's watching on TV right now.
Great.
Or I'm sure he is. I'm sure he has nothing else to do on a Thursday night.
We'll just make sure they meet on Meredith's non-OR days.
Right.
And we're good.
Then you're okay.
Okay, and then I guess the one thing I did want to attract your attention to, unless you guys had comments in between, was that there was this section at the very end. So if you scroll to that very bottom of the doc, there was something what?
Don Rendell, who's a member of the Natural Resources Committee,
Right,
had talked about developing information.
right. And then the trigger piece, I think, was based on the one of the meetings that I wasn't here for, but, so I wasn't quite sure. I just left it there as a placeholder in case someone else had better ideas as to which triggers we were talking about.
That had to do with infrastructure, growing infrastructure based on triggers like population
Right.
or capacity being hit by water treatment plants and things like that.
Yeah. So,
I know I took a bunch of notes that I just have to look up what session that was and
Yeah, I guess if there's consensus that it's a good idea, it doesn't have to be very involved, as long as it's a placeholder essentially for the planning commission to come back and to develop it more.
that's
fully.
true.
Right.
So maybe to clarify a bit more, maybe incorporate like triggers based on capacity to increase infrastructure that supports the town, something like that. It all had to do around the town managed infrastructure capacity. So wastewater treatment, schools. The library should be set for a while once that gets in there. We hope.
right. Alright. So
And then-
corporate triggers for infrastructure capacity, then call out specifically which infrastructure or?
You know, even having something generic, I think, could be
Yeah, so
fine.
incorporate triggers for infrastructure capacity in future planning efforts or ongoing planning efforts or something like that. It's really to put it on the menu.
Yeah.
Just make sure that.
And I do want to keep moving on, but I did have one other comment. I think under community utilities, facilities, and services, that, and this is perfectly fine, but the recommended action number 1 was almost identical to the one under economic development, I think. No, under the first one, the population growth,
Right.
which makes sense. And I don't think it's harmful. I just wanted to mention that.
Okay. Yeah, and the only other thing, just while we're there, was the old plan talked about CSSU, so just updated it to reflect our current school district.
It's taking me so long to unlearn that.
Yeah.
So any other topics there, or are we okay to move to housing?
And then I guess we can just, I can try and circle back with Don about the stormwater piece.
Check back with him about it.
Okay. Because I know they passed a lot of stuff. There was a big coordination with that group last meeting, right?
Yeah, and I don't know whether or not he might feel that it was so well addressed and that he may say it doesn't need to be here.
Okay.
Yeah,
So-
good work on that, though.
Housing, better to talk about the doc first or the list? Do we think?
Yeah, maybe run through the doc.
Okay. Just calling up that email so I have the doc.
Can I just, before we move on, can I just say something? I'm wondering if we could say something like growth and development should not occur at the, at the expense of creating additional stormwater impacts,
For the Don Rendell holding?
Yes.
Okay.
I think that's kind of what he was getting at,
He cares a lot about stormwater management.
Yeah, so it just, again, it's kind of alluding to the pattern of development and the location of development as mattering.
Okay. Can you say that again one more time? It's just,
Maybe something like growth and, recognizing that growth and development should not occur at the expense of, or should not result in increased stormwater impacts and burdens, or something along those lines.
right.
It's just, because there was a concern with some development that's going in that it could result in increased impacts to an already impaired stream, and that are going to be very costly for us to manage in the future. So,
Right, so
Yeah.
how about something like growth and development should not increase impacts to impaired waterways, nor, increase, or, I don't know.
yeah, or degrade, result in further degradation of water quality.
Right.
I don't know if that's exactly the right way to say it, but it's the beginning of an idea of something.
I Recommended action, would you want to start it with something like manage growth and development so that they do not increase impacts?
Yes,
Something
that
like
sounds
that.
great, Dean, yes.
Okay.
That's. And I feel reasonably sure that that is, you know, close to an accurate reflection of what Don was getting at. Of course, he'll have to confirm that, but,
Well, that's good. I feel like you've got a solid
yeah.
placeholder there at the very least.
All right, onward, housing.
Yeah. So it's kind of ugly looking to read because of all this. So I wonder if I go through and accept some things.
Yeah, let's accept it.
Oh, I can't see this. For some reason I can't get there. See
Are
these
the
ones?
checks unavailable to you?
Well, there's two that he can see that I can't see. It's very strange. Let me just reload it here. Otherwise, I'll just make Dean accept the first two.
Sure.
All right, I got it.
There you go.
So that's a little more legible.
So in that first paragraph, the only question I had, there was a statement of 83% of Chittenden County businesses identified housing as their second biggest obstacle to job growth. I'm assuming we might want some kind of reference or citation or something.
Sure. Yeah, it's from that. What's the managing housing together? Or what's
Yeah, it's, something very close to that.
Yeah,
Building homes together?
building housing together or something. I can find it.
And I imagine these are things that would come out through editing as well, but even just a highlight of that and then, yeah.
Yeah.
It is building homes together.
Yeah, and then if you go to the 2-page infographic
Oh, sorry.
on that, like if you, or go back a page.
Wait a second. Oh, this is at the CHT, so
Yeah.
you want the Regional Planning Commission one?
Well, yeah, if you go back a page, I think the third link is the Ecos project.
Yes, that's the
it.
one I want.
Yeah.
Right.
And then if you scroll down, that 2-page infographic link there, well, yeah, or click on it. That's basically where I pulled it from, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. It says the lack of housing stymies job growth. Percentage of Chittenden County businesses that identify housing as the number 2 obstacle to job growth, and the 83% is in the little suitcase there, or whatever.
So even if it's not a direct to that link, but just to say according to the Ecos project or
Yeah.
something, so
Okay.
that there's a little bit of a push toward
Right.
where that came from.
Building homes together. Yeah. Okay.
And then objective 3 is the whole, it talks about 25 to 50 units and just to add dwelling units if we're going to
Right.
stick with that. And then I don't know if that's where we would point to a definition or,
I'm just trying to catch up on the, what's it called?
oh, sure, yeah.
Building homes together.
Building homes together. Is Ecos all capital letters?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would that be a project?
Initiative, project, yeah, I think. that-
Initiative.
A campaign is what they call it.
Okay. And where did you jump to after that?
Just objective 3, the dwelling unit
Okay.
thing. Maybe, yeah. And even just having dwelling unit in the plan, maybe we don't need to define it, and that just is something that would then be discussed down the line. We've got the placeholder, there's,
Right. Yeah, I've got that note. I'll leave that note to myself that can we define this here and reference it.
okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of removing where appropriate. We all sort of thought that was garbagey.
Yeah, I miss it up there in number 3 in the second to last sentence. It was, I think there was an is that should be an it.
In that it should be possible. Third line of objective 3.
Yes.
This one here?
Yeah. Yeah.
In that. Oh, yeah. I'm an excellent typer.
I noticed.
One of those deficiencies of a prep school education in the 1980s.
No
I
type.
think they assumed that people were going to type for me. You know? I don't know. It was ridiculous.
And then,
And a lot of this, just so you guys know, most of this wording and changes came from sitting with the housing committee and 3 weeks ago? A couple weeks ago, a little bit before April break, you know, so we went through this and I just, again, was sort of taking notes or stealing stuff that they had, just so you know kind of where it came from.
yeah, absolutely. Number 5, there was, I think because there had previously been mention of,
The workforce
yeah,
housing.
well, perpetual workforce housing designation had been referred in number 4, and then in 5, it just talked about perpetual affordability. And I was thinking, for consistency, would we say perpetual affordable housing designation? Or I didn't know if there was a specific context for the designation, or if it's more of a terminology thing. And
Yeah, I just, I mean, they wanted to, I don't know, Dean, you could probably help me out here, but as I remembered, it was the fact that affordable and workforce are different, but fall in, some of the numbers end up being, the 80% kind of appears in both of them, so.
Yeah, affordability is defined in the planning and zoning statute, 80%. Housing that would be affordable to households earning up to 80% of the regional median. So, and there can be, affordable at 79%. There's highly affordable. There are different categories if you go down to 50% or even 35%. Workforce is considered between 80 and 120% of the median.
yeah, and that's all great, and I'm glad that's in there. It was more just how
want
we
the
were,
word
the word
designation?
designation, if that was referring to something, which clearly it is.
Right.
Well, perpetual affordability is a bit of a term of art that
Okay.
people in housing will use, is that they will value housing that is perpetually affordable greater than market rate affordable housing or unprotected affordable housing because of the legal mechanisms being in place that will assure that it will remain.
Then it sounds like that's great how it is. Yeah, all the other stuff was really ticky-tack, so I
Okay.
don't need to be that guy.
We're used to it. I like your attention to detail. That's the way I look at it.
One thing we were discussing a little earlier might be added to number 9, the recommendation number.
Recommended actions,
Oh, I'm sorry, objective.
objective 9.
Well, maybe it already is in the recommended actions. But that's relating to objective 9, promote use of innovative and creative development layouts and construction techniques, and also encourage use of energy efficient residential building designs. That's where we could put in something where
Solar.
we require solar, rooftop solar for each new dwelling unit. And we could set a guideline. Generally, an average kind of guideline is a 5 kilowatt system. And we could say, that could be reduced or enlarged depending on the size of the dwelling unit. If it's just like a one room, like a bedroom or something like that, then clearly maybe 5 kilowatts doesn't need to be done. But something like require 5 kilowatt rooftop solar for each new residential or dwelling unit.
I know, I'm sure that that would be met with a lot of discussion, but I mean, California just passed that,
Yeah.
which is pretty huge.
And actually, the stuff that I read says that it does save, it saves 25% on each person's or each dwelling's electric bill. And the systems can be either bought outright in cash up front or with a loan, or they can be leased. And the numbers, that 25% reduction in electricity cost is for a leased system, which requires zero upfront money by the homeowner, and they save that 25% right off the bat on every utility bill, every electric bill they get. So it's not an impact, doesn't have a bad impact on, economic impact on homeowners. It's a net plus. And I think it's just something to say, let's do it now, because you'll want to do it later, and you won't want to do it later, once your roof is old. It's best, a new dwelling unit is perfect for this, because the life of a photovoltaic system is at least or about the life of a typical roof. And so if you want to add it to an old roof, it doesn't make sense, as much sense, because you have to really replace the roof sooner than the system. But if they both go on at the same time, then it's good.
Did it, so it's a solar mandate and insulation and air filter requirements for newly built homes. So that combination of solar, more efficient, better air filtering. What the key is, they found that this is the Energy Commission of California, was that monthly mortgage payments would rise by an average of $40 a month for the houses due to the increased upfront costs, but the utility bills would fall by about $80 a month. So everybody nets out $40 a head.
Yeah.
So you can't just say solar, and that's what we're getting here, where we say we encourage use of energy efficient residential building designs. I think whenever we say encourage, nothing ever happens. So
Yeah,
I think
right.
we sort of have to go towards more like require,
So maybe
the combination of the two.
And to soften it a little bit, instead of just starting with require, say investigate requiring these types of things, similar to what California did in
Right.
April of 2018 or something like that.
Why limit this, and I didn't take a deep dive outside of housing, but why limit this to housing? Could be business.
Oh, good
Yeah, I
point. Yeah.
did a / commercial as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Right. Energy.
Oh, that's true.
That would maybe be in
Yeah.
that section.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
I mean, I assume that this will be met with resistance, right? This is a tall order,
It's a good discussion to have, though.
but yeah.
I think
I mean,
it's-
in terms of barriers, commercial-wise, like, would someone consider that, like, hey, Shelburne, here's why I'm not opening a business or, building a shop in your town. It's because you're requiring X, Y, and Z.
I think we'd have to look at the commercial side of it. I know residential side, it's a net savings
Yeah.
right off the bat. So it should be required if it makes sense economically for commercial as well.
And they may have other tax implications too, I don't know.
Yeah, right.
Benefits.
What do we say? All new residential building designs?
Well, actually, I do know the commercial side, because we have residential and commercial right next to, our two places are
Right.
the same. And so we are going to put that on both. And there's not really a big difference between residential and commercial as far as the rebates
Mhm.
and renting or leasing systems or buying systems between residential and commercial. So they are pretty close to being the same.
Okay.
So if we say investigate, I know in a last meeting, we were talking about doing more things, like saying just require.
Yeah, I think I said that just more to, you're right. I was saying that more to soften the controversial nature. It doesn't bother me at all. I'm fine with that. I mean, it would really be up to the planning commission that is leveraging this plan to try to push things through. And before that, the select board to approve this as part of the plan.
Right.
And we could put it in there and know that it may be.
It may be something
we
that
go back
generates
to the
some
word
discussion.
investigate rather than.
Right. Yeah, leaving it in strong, I think I'm perfectly fine with.
And I don't know if all sites are ideal for solar. My house certainly wouldn't be, but
But that would encourage, if, it would just be new construction.
Right.
So it would encourage, like, people who are designing and developing
think about
projects
To cite it
to think about
correctly.
that and cite it
Appropriately.
correctly right off,
Right.
right off the bat.
So, what do we want to say then?
I'd rather say require, and then we can explain to the select board why it makes sense or not. That's my preference.
For,
Or just
adopt a
mandate?
local version. Yeah.
rooftop solar.
Huh?
I do think that it will get a lot of discussion. Like I said,
It will.
there was some talk about this on the planning commission a few years ago, and
Since this is a document that will have some staying power hopefully and be kind of timeless, should we just say mandate rooftop solar installation and air filter requirements and not refer to the California mandate? Because 5 years from now, people will be like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah,
it might
that's
be
fair.
onto some other mandate.
Well, I think we can also
Agree.
cite our own energy section, which is kind of emphasizing solar over wind, right?
Well, predominantly the reason that is because the
That's
Public
good.
Utility Commission
Mhm.
pretty much squashed wind. We tried to be fairly neutral in just saying sustainable energy instead of specifying the technology. But I mean, the reality is, at least in the current, my understanding with the current regulations that we have, even though wind it dwarfs the solar potential in terms of megawatt potential in Shelburne, I don't know that it would be feasible to implement based on the PUC rules.
Well, but maybe if we cite the, just broad brush, that Shelburne is required to provide a certain amount of electricity generation through sustainable sources, this will make it seem like this isn't just coming out of nowhere. So this mandate to
Certainly.
put the rooftop solar on new houses is keyed to that.
Yep.
This other requirement.
Or you could even add
Because it seems like it would be a big missed opportunity otherwise.
so you could add a modifier in the end to reference the energy section, or to support initiatives as defined in the energy section, which also happen to support the state goals of the interim goals of 2025 or 2030, and then 2050 to be 90%
I also
sustainable.
feel like this is
Getting out
we're
of
kind
hand,
of burying the lead here in number 9. Like, I think it almost has to be like,
its own thing.
yeah,
Yeah.
That would make sense.
yeah.
I think if we, it's good to talk about other sustainable energy sources, but as soon as we open up all sustainable energy sources, then we're not really mandating anything that is tangible that people can, like, get a hold of and say, oh, I can do that. Like, they say, oh, I don't know about wind, and, my neighbors aren't going to like it, and so it's questionable. Whereas rooftop solar is an easy one to do. There's companies that lease the systems. They're, Solar City and Suncommon, they're all over the place now. So you just call them and they put it on, and you don't even have to think about anything about it. So we could say, rooftop solar, so that there's a thing in there. But then we could say that the requirement could also be, at the building owner's discretion, satisfied by, other renewable energy sources. Just to, if somebody really wants to do wind and hates solar, then they could do that. But at least we have a rooftop solar thing that's easy and just like out of the box kind of thing.
maybe slight variation is if you wanted to have, because I'm looking at the differentiation between objectives and recommended actions as it's traditionally been done in the plan. And traditionally, the recommended action would be where you're saying something like, let's adopt a new regulation, or let's revise our zoning regulations. So the option could be for the number 10 to address the range of renewable energy. And even though you might, give people some paralysis if they're saying, oh, geez, geothermal? But have a recommended action that is the very specific thing that we're talking about in 10 right now, which is the
Right.
California mandate.
So should that just wholesale be moved into recommended actions? Because
Well, I'm thinking you could move it, but then you provide the basis for the recommended action by having a more broadly worded objective, which addresses all of those renewable energy generation options. Maybe.
I like that idea.
Yeah. Now to implement it.
Well, I mean, I think, I don't know what number recommended action you'd want it to be.
Number one.
Maybe after number 3 here,
Sure, yeah.
after number 2, I can just
If you
go.
took that number 10 and just stick it in, I don't know, like a 3, 4, or 5 space, and then we could add an objective that's more generic.
Like that.
Sure.
So I just made it, you can't.
Yeah.
I keep thinking that I'm.
Yeah, so as long as that one got moved to 3, but then we need to make sure that we have an objective that is
Right.
sufficiently generic.
Right. Which would be encourage, or is that where we're getting into, what are we saying?
I would say include things, things.
What are we saying? At this point, we're saying, do we want to reference the California mandate here? Or is that to the point of someone mentioned
Yeah, I
earlier
don't
that
know
the
that we need
timeliness
to.
of that
That was
goes
a good
away?
point.
Know what it
Right.
is.
Right.
So I don't know, that might be a tough
Why
one.
not just add it to number 2,
For recommended actions?
under objectives? Just like adding a second sentence.
And should include energy generation,
Yeah,
insulation, like that kind of thing.
something like that.
Could see that.
Or it could be in
Or-
number 9, which says
Yeah.
also encourage use of energy efficient residential building designs.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's
Yeah,
where
Number
we-
9 would be
All
better.
right.
That's where it came from before, and then we popped it out. So I think we just want to have something more generic in 9 here then. Promote these development. Also,
Or even just to say new construction should include, or there's should again.
Isn't it the idea that they and generate a portion of the energy they consume?
Yeah, there you go. That's better. Yes.
require new construction, say that
Thanks,
again?
Dean.
To,
But no, not even that, just after setting, just say and require new construction. So just keep it one big happy sentence.
you lost me.
So instead of the, so
Promote use
lowercase,
of- We're on number 9 here,
Yep.
promote the use, yeah?
so nix the period and just say and require new construction to, okay. New construction
Uh-huh.
Yep.
to
Generate
generate a portion of the energy used.
they consume.
But then there was also, you had in there insulation and air filters and that sort of thing is
Right.
part of theirs. I think insulation is discussed in a lot of places, don't we already? Or at least the energy section really pushes for.
Yeah, that's sort of like, that was
Yeah.
like the default thing, is to mention our values.
Yeah, I kind of didn't even really think of that.
Well, I could also do sort of parenthetical within construction techniques.
Right.
It's good, it's fine to leave
I-
it vague and then have keep the specifics under the recommended action.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that looks good.
Okay.
All right.
Generate a portion of the energy it uses,
Right.
not the portion.
The portion would be good. too.
Oh,
I think.
generate.
we
I said
want-
a portion, and
Okay.
I could, I mean, if you wanted to be really bold and say the majority
Oh, it's that
of,
portion.
Right.
or a major portion of, I mean, how far do you want to go?
Because you wouldn't need portion if you just kept
I mean, if
you just
I
have
mean,
it
the idea
generate
is
only.
that every home should generate something, right? That's the idea.
Well, that's getting toward net zero and all that.
Well, but it's not going to generate everything it uses. So just some, as
Right,
long
to
as
me,
it-
that's the difference between the and a.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, it's same idea.
Okay.
All right. Are there other, being mindful of time here, are there other points to bring up on the remainder of those?
No, I just called out in recommended action number 2, the housing folks really wanted me to call out building homes together, and that's why I spent a bunch of time reading all their stuff, and as sort of the gold standard of people that we should, or the program we should be most tightly aligned with in terms of what they're doing. But yeah, I don't think there's anything else.
No, that's great. Well, and then number 3 kind of, I'm assuming, ties into the points around their charter. Is that what it was that, or quotes or something that, to discuss after we finish the housing session?
Yes. I mean, what they wanted basically was, one of the things we talked about was the accessory dwellings. I mentioned that, let me see. It's number 10, recommended actions number 10. Amend regulations to increase the size limits on accessory dwellings within the sewer service area. And that was something they felt pretty strongly about in terms of being able to increase density in town.
Why just within the sewer service area? I think it should be in all districts.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I don't think we call it out anywhere else, but that's a good point.
Yeah, I think that their idea, some of it was that it's just a starting point. There is currently an allowance for the rural district to have second homes without subdivisions in the rural, if that's a farm operation. But it's really just a question of how far do you want to go. They were looking at a smaller subset because there are people who don't like the idea of the accessory apartment becoming too much like a second unit of similar size. I mean, Dick is a little bit concerned about the neighborhood impact, so the idea that they came up with was, as for an area, would be the sewer service area. But I get it, that the larger the lots are, the less likely it is that the impacts would be felt.
Yeah, this completely doesn't make any sense to me. In a rural area, I mean, who cares? You're not.
Well, I think some of this is
impacting
this
anybody.
idea that we're trying to keep the rural area rural. And so, if we're trying to see a larger portion of the units that we built inside some boundary, then we wouldn't need to create the incentive for the additional units in the outside of the area that we would want to have inside, right? As long as we're sticking to this idea that we're going to try to keep the rural area. I get that if there's going to be growth, it would be better to see 2 units attached than another second one.
Yeah.
But that's not a given.
Like you wouldn't want an accessory unit in the rural area to have its own separate septic and stuff, I
Why
imagine.
not? Why not? We do that all the time in Westford where I work, all the time.
Yeah?
And it's incredibly popular. And a lot of times people they live in the rural area in the first place because they don't like living on top of somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
But they have maybe their one big asset is a ton of land. And so they have a family member or a friend or somebody who wants to come and live with them. And so they create a small separate dwelling. And because it's geographically, it has to be, the driveway, there's only one driveway into onto the property, and then there could be a driveway to another place on the site for the accessory dwelling. Could be a cottage, could be any number of things. Usually when it's geographically separate, it has to have its own septic system. And we don't in Westford, we don't put a limit on the number of bedrooms that somebody can have. And the owner can live in either the accessory dwelling or in the principal dwelling. And the reason for that is we have a lot of aging.
Downsizer.
Yes, and maybe the son or daughter is living in, I don't know, Ferrisburg and bursting at the seams with all the kids and some tiny house there. And so they want to come back and live in the gigantic house that the parent is rattling around in all by themselves. And so, they get to live, they just swap. And we don't count garages or porches or anything against it, the living space.
Which would certainly have solved the issue that, was it the Meuniers? Is that the name? Yeah.
Well, they want to have a separate lot.
Well, they did, but I mean, without the separate lot, that concept of if you had an accessory dwelling and somebody else could live in one, like.
Well, that
the-
can
the
already
owners
happen
and-
already, though. It's a state requirement of state law that the owner of the property can live in one or the other. There's nothing unique about it. The law is that you have to, if you're doing it as an accessory apartment, the owner has to live in one or the other. And that kind of gets at this idea that you're going to mitigate the impact on a neighborhood if the owner is living there one place or the other. But that is the thing that, it's one of the few places where zoning gets at ownership. Typically, zoning doesn't look at who owns it, but when it comes to accessory apartments, it addresses ownership by saying that the owner has to be in one or the other because they have to be linked. If there isn't that connection between the owner living there, then it's just a duplex. And I mean, that's another issue that the housing committee, and it's one of the things that they would be willing to talk about is, do we want to, as a community, say any place that a single-family house is allowed, we automatically up that to be a duplex. That's like carrying this to an extreme because they can be of equal size, and you're taking away any requirement for the owner to be in one or the others. That also creates this sense, though, that the neighborhood fabric could be affected because it opens it up for investor situations. So that right now, you wouldn't have, because the investors are going to not want to live in that house.
When we're talking about the size of the accessory units, how are we defining it? Are we defining it just like square footage or by the number of bedrooms?
It's square footage. It's a percentage of the area of the dwelling to which it's accessory. So if you had a 2,000 square foot house, then the apartment as a permitted use is something that's administrative, could be 600 square feet.
But it's limited to number of bedrooms, isn't it?
Well, permitted would be one bedroom, 600 square feet, no new construction in order to do it. So you're going to normally see those carved out of an existing house. If you're going to have to build a new building to put that apartment irrespective of the number of bedrooms, then you're going to be doing it through a conditional use. So what people.
That's another thing that we took out in Westford. We used to have that be a conditional use, and we made it
Yeah.
a permitted use.
Right, and so what people will do then is they'll come in and they'll get the administrative permit to build the garage with a big space over it, just gonna have a storage space, and then when they have it built, then they come and say, oh, I want to put an apartment in. So there's a way around the conditional use requirement. It's not an obstacle.
Well, so as far as what we're looking at right now, this recommendation is to amend the regs to increase the size limits on accessory dwelling units. So we're talking about taking it out possibly within the sewer service area. But as far as the size limits, if we're talking about, what is it, 30%?
Yeah, so the idea would be to say
30%.
that you could do as a permitted use, an apartment that's half the size of the house. Right now, you can only do that as a conditional use if you do it consistent with the statute. The statute also says you can be more relaxed, so that's what it sounds like Westford has done. Shelburne's has lined its reg directly with the statute, but we could loosen them, and that's what the housing committee is saying, is like loosen the size for a permitted apartment and allow it to be 50%, allow it to be 2 bedrooms, and still make it permitted and not require a hearing.
So both increasing the size and the number of bedrooms that's allowed. That's
Yeah.
what this recommendation is.
Yeah, I think implicit in the reference to size is also the number of bedrooms, but it should be explicit.
Well, if it were increased to be 2 bedrooms, say, that seems like a good idea. If my, or anybody's old parents want to take the accessory building, but they still want to be able to have some other out-of-town guest come, seems like it would make sense to let them have an extra bedroom to put them in.
Well, or a single parent with a child, you know? I mean, it's a great way to increase your affordable housing
Yeah.
stock without adding a ton of new housing, you know, because you're just making more efficient use of the housing that you have. So I would suggest that we do something like, say, amend the regulations to provide additional affordable housing through incentivizing the use of accessory dwelling units. And
I think I'm missing something, because I feel like there's this whole emphasis on hamlets and sort of condensing things. But this seems like it's like a green light to lots of little buildings popping up in all sorts of random spots, which is exactly what we didn't want to have happen.
Well, but it's only going to be on a spot that's already got a house on it, right? So it's
Right, but if you have a big, right,
and if it's and it would be on the same parcel, so
Right.
you know it wouldn't be. I guess visually,
I think that's
there's,
why those guys, I mean, trying to remember the discussion, the details, they were really focused more on the sewer service area, I think, because they're looking to increase density in town and make much more efficient use of
so then you wouldn't
both the Route
be
7
creating-
corridor and the village.
see.
If you've got a big parcel, like basically adding a small house
Yeah.
onto
Yeah, I mean,
it.
the people who are getting accessory apartment or making inquiries in the rural district are usually looking at they want big spaces.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be affordable, an affordable housing unit. It's not. And it'll, you know, have as much likelihood being used for a family member as an Airbnb. Exactly. Yeah. So I think the housing subcommittee was looking at this and the idea of focusing growth and delivering affordable housing more likely through this type of approach than to say everywhere.
By keeping it within the sewer service area.
Yeah, and
So
they were
keeping
originally
that
talking
more
about the
importantly.
village, and it came about as a result of some of it, well, at least, of the discussion of infill, and I think they just felt like the sewer service area made some sense.
That makes sense to me.
Makes sense, yeah. Yeah, and I guess if we're talking about somebody with a 20,000 square foot house and we're saying 50%, then that's a pretty big house out there that they're putting as an accessory. Yeah,
This is interesting. I isolated both ways.
yeah, yeah.
And,
me
and in
too.
the back of my mind, I thought Dick's going to watch this and say, all right, we need to talk about this again anyway.
Yeah, Dick.
But let's key it to increasing affordable housing, because I think that's important, and that gets us into, you know, I think it avoids discussions of concerns about how this might look and density and those kinds of discussions, and keeps the focus on we're creating more dwelling spaces for people, usable dwelling spaces, because there are many single parents with one or two kids, and they need a 2-bedroom. I mean, they're telling us the need for 2 and 3 bedrooms is just incredible for families. So,
Saying this could help alleviate, or this could help contribute to affordable housing stock?
yeah, I think
Just
so.
to have that
Yeah.
so that it's noted?
Well, but I mean, the whole section is about that, right? So the whole goal is to have an
There's a lot,
adequate supply of housing to accommodate a diverse array of residents. So I guess it just becomes redundant if we tie it to affordable housing. I mean, that's the whole reason we're doing all these things is,
I mean, I do think the Airbnb thing is that jumps out at me, is that's why folks would want that. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's fine.
Well, it brings more
You know, maybe
to
then
the
you'll have dinner in
area
Shelburne
and-
too.
right?
Right,
Um,
yeah. That's probably somebody who's coming to go to the museum or the farm,
Right.
and Teddy Bear Factory, right?
Yeah,
Or ride bikes around and, whatever.
which is great unless
And
you're
there
the
is
neighbor.
already mention of affordable housing.
well, the whole
There's a lot,
section's
but
about
yeah.
affordable housing, really. So, I mean, I hear where you're coming from, but,
Well,
Just to go back to the size limit,
do you
Dean,
want
is
to
there-
call it out specifically?
Well, if,
Seemed like that's what you were asking before. I never did edit that.
I guess we should be more specific how, or maybe we could keep it vague and it gets looked at.
We would be the ones amending the regs as well later,
Yeah.
right? So if
Okay.
this was agreed to, then as a planning commission, correct me if I'm wrong, we would be the ones saying this is.
we or whoever's sitting on this.
Right,
while
well,
this
we
plan is
meaning
in
this,
effect.
like us,
Yeah,
body, whoever, yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
Because it is one of those things. If we're looking at encouraging affordable housing, but we're allowing something that's 50% of, a smaller house that's in the sewer service area, we're still not addressing people who live in a small house, and 50% of 1,200 square feet, still only 600 square feet. We should at least talk about a cap, I think, on like 50%, but a cap of 1,000 square feet or something like that.
But would we, well, because it,
Places have a cap and a floor. So you would have a minimum size you could have, almost irrespective of how small your house was.
Yeah.
That's what we have in Westford. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but that's what it is.
But I mean, we don't want to call that deep level of detail.
I don't think so.
no,
This is
just-
the future, yeah.
Just
Yeah.
And also, I have not been very mindful of time because you still have some points on the housing committee and we haven't started transportation, which, yeah, I don't think we can go until 11 tonight. So let's,
Do you have the ability to project that little doc they sent us with the 4 things? Yeah, I mean, this part will take, I think it'll take 2 minutes,
okay.
unless you guys decide to just drag it off the rails. No. So, I mean, they basically want to explore this accessory apartment size issue in more detail, which would benefit the discussion we just had. Looking at a kind of a housing trust fund, a little bit like the, open space type fund. So as a town, do we look at having some funds to be there for people who need affordable housing, need to be in the area? Well, you can read this, right? I don't want to read this for you, but assistance guidance with the maintenance, rehabilitation, restoration of existing housing stock. So this might be a group that, and again, correct me where I go astray here on this, but it was this idea of kind of people have a house, they think, well, it's old and I'm just going to tear it down and build something new. To have some group like Stephen and other people to come in and say, no, this is a great house, here's why, and this is how you could maintain what you've got. Or even people that are kind of new first home, kind of only thing they can buy is a little bit junky, like, all right, what can I do to fix this up? And having some resources for them to say, this is, new windows going to increase your efficiency tremendously, blow some insulation in there, fix this piece up. So it's sort of like, I don't know, a committee of experts, I guess, a resource for people to lean on. Yeah, and then just looking at the kind of affordable housing piece at much.
The things that we have
Yeah.
are one example.
Right.
that has
We
been
talked a little bit about the other, this one here that Pomerleau bought and gave to them, but the other 2 are potentially in flux a little bit right now in terms of new owners inheriting and maybe looking to sell. And so that's, I mean, you think about so I live out by Quiniasca, the one that's adjacent to Quiniasca there. That's a big chunk of houses. If that suddenly disappeared, that's a lot of affordable homes that go off the market for Shelburne. That's a big impact to Shelburne. So that was the 4th piece that they were going to investigate. So, I mean, unless some people had reasons why they shouldn't do this, it seemed like kind of one of those, like, yep, great.
Those are great.
Yeah.
And Ron that's the way he operates. He likes to make sure that you've seen it, and he likes to know that you're okay with it, and then he's going to do it.
And that's
good.
a crack team too. They're good.
Yeah. Absolutely. So
So the minutes will show that
that thumbs up on or if are there any other considerations around that for the,
I move that the housing committee take these 4 items and run with it. Anybody want to second that?
I'd second that. All in favor?
Hi.
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Yeah, and good things will come out of that discussion as well, so that's good. All right. So we can just whip through transportation in 30 minutes, right?
I hope so.
From going through this and recognizing that, this is just a suggestion, just recognizing that there were lots of edits and we got it earlier this week and that sort of thing. I assume that you probably have some comments just for setting things up and some areas to kind of keep an eye on. I'm wondering if because we certainly don't have time to go through line by line, but if there are conceptual things or things you'd like to draw attention to that we could perhaps provide a bit of clarity, that then the format could be cleaned. It might have just been how I printed it, but there were lots of spaces and big giant sections that were X'd out. So if we could maybe get consensus on, hey, this section I removed, this is how it was redone, and then we could just agree, okay, let's accept that strike through so it can clean it up a bit and make it easier to process.
Okay. Unfortunately, some of this happened, I don't know, Dean, it might be helpful to have a side-by-side of the if it's possible, of the original, because remember I was doing the suggesting editing and something went wrong, and
Of the existing town plan
yes,
section?
yes,
Yeah, let me find that.
there was it turned out one of my kids was logged on to Google Docs, and anyway, it created problems. I didn't realize it at the time. So, some things look like edits that I made that look permanent that actually aren't meant to be. I think that's some of the confusion. So.
I mean, I've taken your document, I've got it downloaded, and then I've turned off I've got the simple track changes, so this is
Okay.
one way of doing it. I mean, is this,
Well, I kind of really changed it quite a bit, so I'm wondering if it might be helpful for people just to see how much I changed it from what I started with.
okay,
And that's what is unfortunately not tracking.
okay.
We don't care what was there before, in the sense that, on some level, because
To some degree, yeah. It's as long as if the concepts are there.
Okay. Well, the
I'm more interested in what you
okay.
have
So
created than what
well,
legacy
what I
document.
tried to do was to bring walking and cycling up on par with getting around by in vehicles, which is the most significant change, and because up until previously it was kind of considered as a separate thing, sort of like nice frilly thing on the side to have as feasible. So I've kind of tried to integrate it into, no, transportation includes being able to get around by cycling and walking. And then trying to, again, to kind of integrate it with land use planning. So I, using the language of placemaking, that's the goal. I'm describing a little bit what I mean by that. And then going into how that could actually happen. So the first thing is align transportation with land use, and consider the needs of all users during the road design process, and then adopt a complete streets policy. Make public transit more feasible, and start to determine criteria for roadway design that is place-based, okay? Because we didn't have the greatest experience with the consultants who came in and proposed solutions for Bay Road. Those proposals would have gone through at great cost to the local setting. So, what else can we offer people in a situation where there are unsafe conditions? And I think everybody is more or less on the same page that when there are traffic hazards, and you're taking your life into your hands just to go get your mail or take your dog out to do its business, that's something that we need to address. So how does that, what do those interventions that would achieve more safety look like in a context-specific basis?
I continue to struggle with the boundary between kind of the old and the new, and just what is meant by the context sensitivity and the placemaking. And on one level, I get it, but on another level, I don't. So if there was a proposal to put a path, let's say, along a road in Shelburne, and the neighbors didn't like it, and they said, we want you to paint a shoulder instead, okay? And if they all agreed that that was context sensitive, and it costs less money and whatever, and a traffic expert, someone whose job it is to assess safety, looked at the idea and said, that's really not safe, but it is context sensitive. What trumps the fact that it fits in and that the people who live near it like it? That's what I'm trying to understand, is where does it get resolved?
Well, I don't think we know. I don't think we know what we mean even by context-sensitive design yet in the various settings of Shelburne's roads. So I don't know how you would answer that question without knowing what is actually being proposed. I mean, I think this is going to be, any kind of intervention is going to result in change that's going to be unpopular with somebody. But it's a question of degree, I think a very, a small sidewalk or a path along the side of the road is a lot less impactful than, an 8 to 12 foot multi-purpose path. That was what was being, the equivalent of another huge lane of traffic. That was what the consultants were proposing and depicting in a lot of their illustrations. So, I think we just need to study what the options are. And, I've suggested some manuals for doing that. There's the Small Town and Rural Multimodal Networks manual is fantastic for showing what has been done and can be done in rural settings.
Where are we?
It's way down in recommended actions. It's on.
That was something that I was having a hard time with. I see the goals and I see that there's good messaging in here, but that the main transportation section has an introduction and then a goal, and then a description, and then another goal and a description. Whereas we'll have to tackle this at some point anyway, but we need to have a goal and then a list of one or more objectives and then one or more supporting recommended actions to support those objectives, which it does do. Like sidewalks and paths then doesn't really have a goal, but does have objectives, and then recommended actions. So I think that some of it is there, and that's why I was suggesting that if there's, and I'm open to approaches, but even if it's clean up all of the edits and strike throughs, and then maybe if we had in, say, next packets your vision of that section following that format, if it's easier just to clear out all those strike throughs and then have a copy of the existing one, which we probably all have anyway from previous iterations, but to make sure that those concepts are all included with the new, spin's the wrong word, but with the new perspective that you're putting on it to incorporate a lot of the good ideas that you have, that might be just an easier thing to walk through and ensure consistency. What I'm really afraid of is that if we end up spending a lot of time going through this and then it gets restructured, then it's going to be like starting over again when we go back through to review it. And I found myself kind of skimming through and looking at the concepts that were being put forth. And I do have some comments and things about it, but I was struggling with retaining the overall flow in my mind, how everything was coming together.
Okay, so you want it in the format of the original one, this new revised approach in the format of the original one?
Yeah, I mean, not just the original transportation section, but every section that we're doing with the goal, objective, recommended actions format. Because I think each of these things that you have, like under the goal of recognizing transportation planning as a fundamental element of placemaking, then the things that are under that, there are things that could be either objectives or recommended actions. But if somebody, and this gets back to how we're using the document or how people are looking at it, that if I suppose somebody could just go and straight to the transportation section and wants to understand the meat and the details, but if somebody's flipping through a town plan, like some of the ones that we looked at, the sections have some form of consistency. So I feel like eventually, be it in editing or wherever, we would eventually have to go through the process of breaking this content into that format.
Okay. I don't even remember what the original one looked like at this point, but I don't remember that they had, the first part just talked about the policy and had some goals, and then it didn't start to get into objectives and recommended actions. Those were kind of under the various topics of, streets and sidewalks and transit and rail and other things. So I can take a stab at that.
Yeah, and I'd also be happy to, like, if you wanted to bounce things around or something, or like Dean and I, well, we didn't the last couple of weeks, but try to get together periodically to plan out what's coming up, and even if there's just an outline kind of thing or ideas of how to help group that, because I understand how colossal of a section this is. But I'm trying to make it easy for not just editing, but then also for review.
Okay. But what's here is beautifully written and I think pretty powerful, so.
Yeah, there's great ideas.
It's exciting.
Right, yeah, it is. I'm definitely not trying to take away from
Yeah,
that
no,
at
no,
all.
no, But you're right, it needs to be organized consistently.
To the question of what does the existing document look like, the current plan, this is the current plan, so it's got that introductory paragraph. It's got an overall goal with a paragraph that leads into the series of sections. So sidewalks, brief paragraph, objectives, recommended actions.
So it didn't, so what I'm trying to say is that I'm actually, what's here is actually sort of following what was originally there. I just expanded on the policy statements because it seemed important, we're changing the policy very much. So, so before, everything was just, transportation meant cars, essentially. And then it was, all about, pedestrians were only included in the sidewalks and paths and trails section, which are sort of, under the old system, those were just like special occasion things happening, And what I'm trying to do is say, no, this should be something that is, much more integrated into everything about how we use land. So particularly in the village and the growth areas, less so in the rural areas.
Yeah, and I fully support that. I definitely like the ideas and where that is headed.
So I don't know, maybe the,
So for example, like while we're in the document, so you have the transportation section with the introduction to goal, additional text supporting that, another goal, additional text, but then there's a couple of pages of strike through. I mean, would it just be easier to say, okay, let's accept that strike through and say that's gone, unless you needed it for reference or something?
no.
And then that starts to really clean it up. And then from there, it should be easier to be able to identify, okay, within that text, do we have, like, this is an obvious, we have the goals defined, what are some obvious objectives, and then separate out the recommended actions? Because then that, like we just did with the housing, it helps for me anyway to facilitate the discussion to see, oh, okay, this is what we're saying we want to do, and this is how we could suggest to do it.
I mean, if you look at, I mean, you can see it a little clearer here. I mean, this is the original one, right? And then there's goals up front, but then objectives and recommended actions are specific to these particular things, which she still has.
Yeah.
I think Kate's just done a great job of expanding that and having
Agreed.
multiple goals, but I don't know. I guess the question are all the objectives and recommended actions in the sections gonna tie back to the meta goals in the beginning?
Right. And I think that if we saw that,
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I can try and,
Because you basically just got 1, 2
yeah.
goals. Or is
Let's see,
is
there
there-
might be one, let's see, 1, 2,
And then I think it goes into the, yeah.
yeah, it's just 2 goals. So I just added another goal, basically.
Yeah, so I
from
guess
what
what
was
the
there.
question would be, from a organizational standpoint, you've got could you take the first goal and slide it down to put both the goals at the bottom of all your opening exposition?
Okay.
I mean, does that make sense? Or does
Yeah.
the goal have to be, this goal is a reference to that? And then there's some exposition and that's tied to that goal?
Yeah, that was kind of how it was, but I mean, I
Okay.
could turn that into,
multiple goals at the front, I think, too.
Well, that's what I'm just wondering. I can't remember.
Blanking
I
on
could
which
turn
one
it, I
it
could
is.
try and turn this into objectives and recommended actions for each one of these if you want.
No, I mean, that's what I'm saying. I think if the objectives and recommended actions for those goals that you elucidate in the very beginning are kind of found in the various sections later, which are like sidewalk paths and trails, blah, 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 then I don't know that you need to.
And that's a fair point, because then it just becomes transportation, here's the introduction, which has been expanded with those concepts, and then have the goals, and then the individual subsections have their specific objectives and recommended actions.
Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty huge policy shift that I am advocating for here. So I thought it needed some fleshing out, because it's a huge departure from what we had. And then we also, it was made apparent to us that how this happens is very important to many people in the town, and we do not have consensus on, we have consensus on, I think, the importance of increasing safety, but how we do that in various settings remains to be determined. In some places, it'll be pretty straightforward and easy. In other places, where we're having to kind of adapt an existing, old street or road that's narrow conditions, that's going to be trickier. So that's why, the suggestion for pursuing context-specific design. And the good news is this is a problem all over New England. I just attended the Walk Bike Summit last week, and they had a presentation by the Regional Planning Commission of the Berkshires, the Massachusetts Berkshires, and they have had some great ideas on this very topic. And they, similar to us, they have, throughout their region, they have municipalities that exhibit all different kinds of tricky contexts. And so there's a lot of work being done in this area.
Would there be a higher level of comfort with the rewrite if we got rid of those categories, the bike ped, highways, and so on, and maybe came up with, I'm not saying get rid of them entirely and have one really long section, but have new headers so that are not modal? Because I get where you're coming from, and it seems like if there are vestiges of this modal orientation, it's like something you got to work against. So let's get rid of those.
That would be my suggestion too, because they call it out in the old one where they say, While it is important that all of these be treated as an integrated system, for clarity, they will be discussed separately, and then they have these sections, whereas Kate's whole intro seems to be much,
Synthesized, yeah.
it's like, let's not even pretend that they're separate, so.
I mean, are there different conceptions that, what would they be? Would it be process and result? I mean, I'm hearing a lot about the process that's used for the planning of improvements that needs to be different. So that's a real big element here. So I don't know if that's worth a section.
It's interesting looking at it, yeah, through that lens. I'm certain, I'm seeing that, and I get the challenge, Kate, that you're describing here.
Another observation I've made is that some of the statements Kate's written, they struck me as it's the vision. They're written to me, and I receive them as a vision statement. And so maybe this is the one chapter that warrants its own a vision for transportation, and that's what sets the stage for the rest.
Calling it out
As the community's
statement.
new vision for transportation in
Right.
the 21st century.
Which,
Something.
and I think that was, like, you did that in growth and development with the 2050, here are some quotes that we want to be able to perceive ourselves as in 2050.
Yeah.
It's either that or make sure that these things get to the front of the plan and are the feature of the vision.
Which
I'm not
could,
sure we need to call it out as a new vision. I agree, there's a lot of change that has happened since the previous one. But all of the housing growth and development, they all are changing too. And we can't say this is a newer one, or more new. So I think we ought to still say, because as soon as we say it's new, then next year it's going to seem like that's old language. But
I do like the idea.
the vision of section that says vision statement,
Yeah.
I think that would help.
Yeah, I like that idea. I do have a couple quibbles with some things in there, but I can send those separately.
This is really good, Kate. Not to say yours weren't good, Andrew.
yeah, and Dean, that's I'm trying to think that through. I mean, the idea of we've got like subsections, so there's roads, then paths, then public transportation, then rail and air.
Paths is first.
Okay.
I'm just kind of kidding.
Well, right. But recognizing that we have those previously, they were all segregated, and there is an idea of bringing them together. And I know in initial revisions, when we talked through this, even though they were all broken out separately, each of the sections, like the roads section would have a lot of commentary about how this needs to integrate with paths and sidewalks and be supportive of that. And in the paths and sidewalks section, it would say this needs to be supportive of these other areas. So I think, well, and same thing with public transportation, rail and air are kind of their own things. But those other ones are really integrated. So I'm trying to think without my mind blowing up what it would look like to take those three sections and consolidate them. Because and maybe it's just how I process stuff, but I'm trying to think of how do you break it down, recognize the content, eliminate the content that doesn't make any sense, and then once you have that, then consolidate and bring it together if that makes sense.
Well, I would, it seems to me that the logical thing is to tie it to the land use. So, you know, in the village and in the growth area, it seems like we would want to be striving for absolutely multimodality everywhere. In the rural area, that becomes less a distinguishing characteristic. of the roads. I mean, we're not going to have roads that have sidewalks or, you know, possibly even, separate bike lanes and things like that too much in the rural area. I mean, some places maybe, but the typical thing will be, you know, people are sharing, the cyclists are sharing the road with cars. And then we've talked about having, in the zoning regulations, we have some standards for, I mean, we've already done some of this in zoning regulations for kind of calibrating what facility is needed and depending on what the context is. So that might be kind of a way to start within the village, you know, and then that could be a way to talk about the entire environment, which includes parking, you know, because if you're a pedestrian and you are a visitor, you know, the idea is like park once, leave your car, fill it up, you know, recharge your Volt or whatever they're called, and, you know, go out and shop or whatever, visit the museum or something, spend money. So it ties in, kind of interrelates everything. And then, you know, the next tier would be maybe the neighborhoods that are sort of between the edges of the village, and then you're getting into the growth area. And then, you know, and that gets into all of the undeveloped land that's in the growth area. And that starts to set a vision for, makes it logical that these should be integrated in a way that they relate to the village center, you know, in some way. And maybe that's through a path system that connects neighborhoods and things. I would, one of the things I would really like to talk about in here too is the importance of having redundancy in the network, particularly for pedestrians and cyclists. You know, you want to be able to have a high quality, pleasant, exciting pedestrian realm is one that offers many different routes. You know, I mean, think of the places that you like to go to, you know, walking into a cul-de-sac and then out of a cul-de-sac is just doesn't, you know, that's not, you know, doesn't do it. The village is great because you can wander around and take many different routes, you know, and we're expanding the ability to do that with our municipal center, you know, and having, you know, leveraging that site and having different entrances and things, gardens around the library.
Yeah, I think that might be worth exploring. So instead of having the transportation section with roads, then sidewalks, then rail, air, parking, public transportation.
Fried egg, right?
Exactly. Do something like that where like the center one becomes a section or a subsection, and then the next ring has its section, and so it's a way of almost approaching the transept concept, but from this. Well, a couple questions. Would this make sense to try and schedule a session with no more than 3 of us so we don't violate open meeting laws, to get a good kind of an outline and structure together that makes sense, that then we can really start building off of, and then have a meeting that we could dedicate time to really
That would be very
going through
helpful
that?
to me because just communicating this in a way that makes sense to, you know, I mean, you know, as a landscape architect, you know, I think this way, but that's not, Stephen, you probably know too, a lot of people don't think visually and spatially and in terms of transects and things like that. So sometimes I'll state something and, you know, I can tell that nobody knows what I'm talking about. And I'm not sure how to be clear. So it would be nice to have, you know, to maybe just do this once and have the feedback in real time, like, you know, this is making sense, you've lost us, kind of thing. That would be very helpful.
Yeah, that'd be great. So maybe we can take an action item to try and coordinate something, and maybe on the earlier side next week or something.
Before we go home tonight.
Yeah, sure. So let's do that. But then one of the other questions was, since we have
Stephen.
a member from the public. Did you have any particular topics or concepts that you wanted to share?
Well, I just got scared by what you're planning, because I've gone to so many of the meetings trying to just deal with.
And is that, yeah, I think so, yeah.
Yes, pardon. Steve
Thanks.
Bayetti, and I live on Bay Road. So, there was wording that, when you went through many of your iterations in that was this, a small amount of what the people that lived on Bay Road, the small group we were hoping to get. And it's just a few words and that remained, and it said, enhancements to town roads fit the neighborhood scale and setting. So that wording was, when it left planning, that was in there, and it went to numerous meetings with the bikes and path people, and they didn't adjust it. And then Kate, you had a new iteration that I found today that you worked on, and it still remained, but it was in a larger section of wording. So I would hope that at least this stays, you're going to have a little working group, put something together, you said, prior to a meeting maybe?
Yes, we're realizing that we need to figure out how to reorganize
How to
this.
design it.
Yeah, just because the former organization just doesn't kind of support the new policy of.
I understand,
That
I
we're
hear
trying
you,
to,
yeah.
move in that direction, yeah.
But you're looking for the phrase of something not fitting the neighborhood scale being
Right, I think you
retained.
actually, Andrew, came up with this
Right.
wording that took something that we had in a number of paragraphs or state
Yeah.
bullet points,
Right.
bullet points, and condensed it to this, and
right.
so.
And I think that concept, I wouldn't see a change in that concept. I think that we would always be looking to make sure that improvements or changes fit the scale and setting.
Yeah, I mean, there was a phrase, similar phrase in the housing section, or growth and development, one of the two that just because I've been bouncing between the two of them all, but same idea of not negatively impacting existing neighborhoods, I think was some of the phrasing we'd worked out with you guys.
Because the document that we were working with tonight, it goes to great length explaining new development, where you mandate certain things on the developers and so forth, and those things can all, still exist because it's new development, but trying to retrofit something is the problem. And I think that's how you tried to address it here. So when you get your little working group, a small group that tries to come up with a new outline of how you want it to read through best, hopefully something like this is continued.
What was the specific phrase that you were talking
Well,
about?
it's just part of a sentence right now, that's all that's left. So it was in it's like page 2. So as page 2 of transportation, it's under the heading goals development, comprehensive trans system to manage competing interest in a limited available space, existing roads, enable. So it's at the very end of what's under that. It's to fit the neighborhood scale and setting. And then, well, it's been rewritten for tonight. In that same section, the start of the paragraph says, determine criteria for roadway design elements. Yes, Dean's found it.
How would you adjust that? Or does that, you're just asking that it be kept in?
That it be kept in, yes.
'Cause it makes sense to have that in.
It's-
It seems important.
I mean, I think, maybe I should have just said this more clearly. This is all about enhancing livability, and livability means respecting the existing character of the area. It means helping more different modes of transportation move around safely on our streets. It means slowing the traffic. It means a lot of things. And we don't know, I think there's consensus growing that that's what we want to achieve. How we do that is very much up in the air. We don't know how we're going to do that in all places yet. Some places will be easier than others to achieve that, and other places it's going to be more complicated. But I think it's important to acknowledge that a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work. And that's, like what I was saying, there's some great work that's being done in the New England region on some of these communities very similar to our own and in conditions very similar to our own. And we can learn from those and figure out what to do.
Yeah, no, thank you for that feedback. That's important. And I think a theme that I wouldn't see that going away. So that's good. Thanks for calling that out. All right. Well, I think then, yeah, after this, we'll just schedule who and when, and we'll get that outline together and then make sure that we find time for a future meeting to discuss as a commission. It's all right.
I don't want to stir the pot. I just feel like when someone comes to a meeting, I'd love to know more specifically what your concerns are. So you said you live on Bay Road, and maybe everybody else knows already, but I don't know too much about the history of the past plan, and I'm newer to the Planning Commission. So I'd love to know what the concern is.
Well, I'll try to do it in like 2 minutes. So are you familiar with the Tool engineering company?
No.
Chittenden County Regional Planning
Yep.
Commission. This is the world according to Steve, of course. As I understand it, they offered to do a study of Bay Road, and this outfit does large studies for big cities and such. So they took the data, they collected vehicle traffic data and such, and they presented 3 options to improve Bay Road. 2 $1 million plans, and the third one was a $6 million plan. So right from Jump Street, this was an uphill, because who was going to pay that?
Right.
So Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission, it was a $50,000 study. And I think our portion of it was $10,000, but still, it all got paid for by us. So the project was out of scale. It included using existing easements that were, in many people's minds, meant different things, but creating an 8-foot path through the front lawns of many of the houses, adding new culverts. So it just had a lot going against it. So many people came out to the meetings, and then the select board turned it down ultimately. There were revisions to the plan, but I don't think they heard they just really wanted a $1 million plan, it seemed, because they didn't come back with anything more modest that probably would have been accepted if there was co-funding for sidewalks, and if it was just a sidewalk, that might have flew. People might have been happy, but there were over 100 people signed the petitions against it. About 50, 60 of them were people that lived on Bay Road. There was only one person who had an interest in it, and that was a renter, but everyone else was kind of against it.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for asking that. Okay. So, all right, speed round. Updates?
So I'm just going
Oh,
to mention,
sure.
that when we talk about transportation in this session, we'll talk about helicopters too.
Yeah, I actually did have a note because
Okay.
of the,
So
yeah,
we'll take care of that.
sure.
In
Way
terms
to
of,
squash my dreams, Dean.
We do have a Shelburne business that is developing kind of planes that can go straight up and over. So it's gonna be like personal little jump planes. So we should be ready for them.
Yeah.
Yes, there
Really?
hasn't been any discussion of airport, and yeah, we'll talk about it in that work session. As far as updates, I did want to provide the update having to do with the funding for the graphic design consultant, and there's like 10 minutes worth of work that needs to be done, because if we don't do it now, it's just going to delay things.
Sure.
So I'm going to just throw up on the screen some things.
This was on the select board.
Yeah, so on
To vote
Tuesday night, the select
Tuesday.
board authorized tapping some funds that had originally been budgeted as match for a grant. We didn't get the grant, so they're saying, yeah, go ahead and use that money to pay for the graphic design consultant. And so I have a draft contract with Maya, and I've given it to Lee, and as soon as he gives me the okay, I'm going to share it with her. So she and I have been talking, and what she was hoping could happen if we want this to move forward quickly, is to get some idea of what the initial, I'll call it template, she would develop is going to look like. And this happened yesterday, so I didn't think there was much point in saying, okay, between now and tomorrow night, go back and look at those plans that you like. But if we can start to narrow things down, it's going to help her get started. She had worked on the Essex Town Plan. It won both a Vermont and Northern New England award. And so it's an 8.5 by 11 inch document, about 100 pages, lots of photos, and follows a fairly conventional, in some instances, the blocking is it's pages in 2 columns, essentially. So if this is the kind of plan that you think you'd like, it would be good to know. And maybe this is just one of those, think about it and give me feedback, and she's not gonna know for sure. But in contrast to that, one of the other plans that people had liked, also a Plan of the Year award winner, was Hubbardton. And the Hubbardton plan, if I'm understanding it correctly, is 8.5 by 11, not in portrait, but in landscape mode with each half. And it's more text. It's more text dense than the Essex plan. So it does have nice photos, and photos will be something that we talk about. So the Hubbardton plan had received some discussion amongst the group a while ago. Another plan that got some positive feedback was the Ferrisburg plan. And it is also landscape mode, but not as simple as the Hubbardton plan. I guess I think it just seems visually to me a bit more sophisticated and less. It's fairly text rich. But see, these are some of the questions that are going to help her begin the process. So Ferrisburg, and I think I also brought along Heinsberg. And I'm just trying to contrast the portrait versus landscape, and the number of columns, things like that. And whatever direction the commission thinks it can offer. Here they have sort of a 2/3, 1/3, not exactly, 50%, 60%, 40%, 60%, in terms of their layout. So it's not balanced, but maybe it's more enticing that way.
Allows for that third column occasionally.
Yeah. So the good news is the select board has said okay to the use of the funding. Also good news, the contracting should happen pretty quickly. The idea would be to model that contract after the agreement that was developed with Essex. The first step in all this is she puts together a 10 to 15 page template that's going to, as much as possible, use real text. She would much rather work with real text. I'm assuming that would be from the initial parts of the plan. And then the way she worked with Essex is that she went away for a while they finalized all the text. I would like to suggest that if there's a batch of sections, kind of the low controversy sections like the parks and recreation and the childcare, that she get those and she can take the template once the template's been okayed and then apply the template to those chapters. She doesn't work on a document basis, she works on a chapter basis, so that would be fine with her. It's just that Essex chose to do it where she went away for a while and then did the whole document.
Well, you know, we started off being more ambitious about what we wanted to do, and then we realized that that just wasn't, and we didn't get the grant and everything, that was just probably unrealistic. So we're sort of doing a kind of modified version of what we had, which is pretty text-heavy still. So I would think one of the, maybe not the Essex example, much as I like that idea, I think maybe that's, you know, the next time.
Yeah, I think the majority seem to be enamored with the Essex plan, but the reality is we did not.
Too aspirational for us right
We didn't
now.
use the thinning shears enough. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that Essex also had the benefit of that, you know, when they were updating their plan, they were selected for one of these community Orton Family Foundation, which happens to have its offices here in Shelburne, used to be. They awarded one of their heart and soul grants to Essex. And so there was a pretty substantial investment in community planning process that I think made their plan it gave them a huge jump. So if we're taking a plan like Essex off the table, that's a comment on what more specifically, the graphics, the photos, I
would say that our plan is definitely more text heavy.
Yeah.
So the Essex plan was gorgeous and lots of pictures and great for community and all of that. But I think my opinion is seeing the landscape formats, it just strikes me as that's more along the lines of what would fit what we have.
Uh-huh.
And then sprinkling pictures throughout, just it wouldn't necessarily be the photo book kind of image that Essex had.
Okay.
Go down on this one, Ferrisburg one. This is all like history. I'm more interested in what they're, like a real page where they're, yeah.
This, if I'm not mistaken, is a plan that originally got laid out by Brandy Saxton,
Pretty
who
easy on the eyes, which is good.
I think Brandy was the person that did it. Then I think the town took it over.
Brandy is the one we used for the
She
form-based.
form-based update and also the design guidelines.
I like the consistency of maybe pursuing something like that, you know, with sprinkling in some of the graphics. 'Cause pictures are always easier to understand. Some of the maps.
Do you think, I mean, asking your opinion, Dean, do you think the Essex design could work for us? I mean, you
I think it
seem
would be
sad
harder.
that we weren't pursuing it,
No,
but
no, I don't know that I'm sad. I think it's realistic because one of the things that having such a head start with the heart and soul process allowed them to do is to really condense. And I don't think we are going to be able to condense things as
Yeah.
much as they did.
right.
Ian, are you saying that the portrait format doesn't lend itself to a non-condensed, or just that?
No. I'm
it
just saying
requires
that
more
the
photos?
amount of text, our plan would be longer. It would not be as, these statements that we've written are much longer than what their policy statements are. So it's just going to be larger blocks of text, unless we pull them apart and we convert things into statements with bullets and things like that. And
Oh, I
I
see.
mean, maybe we're going to do that, but we just have so many more. There's so much more verbiage at this point until the group says, no, we can sacrifice this. But no, I'm not commenting on portrait versus landscape. Whoops.
Can you go back to that Essex plan?
The Essex?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, because I'm not getting the difference. If it's not a portrait versus landscape difference, then what is?
The Essex has really big pictures and big color blocks with just a few bullets in it. So it's visually interesting.
Oh, okay.
With very
I see
little
what you mean.
text, actually. So if we use that format, it would be 250 pages.
Pretty text-heavy page, like one of those ones there, right? That's
Right, but that's like a
It
third of one of our
synthesizes
pages.
all of this visioning
it's-
that they did. They won this huge grant, and they spent a couple of years with having all these community meetings and everything. So everybody's really, you know, we're not anywhere near on the same page in our town on a bunch of this
I
stuff.
have a copy of it still floating around. I can show it to you. I mean, it's an amazing document, but like, you know, they're able to take chunks like the goals of what do we talk about with ours, the, you know, goal, objective, and whatever. I mean, and they're very, and it's really neat because it's kind of this is it, who owns it, what the next steps are. You know, it's incredibly digestible, but I think we have this much stuff and they were able to narrow it down to
I don't
here.
see any reason why Maya couldn't have an introduction that's very visually appealing with big photos and, you know, kind of capturing in bold font sort of our
Would it,
vision statements.
and would it
And
waste her
then-
time to have her like take childcare, for example, or Parks and Rec and see if she could
Or even our intro with the
hard
vision
enough.
and the history.
make it look, you know, more
Well,
Something you'd actually
you
wanna
heard
read.
one of those. And the other thing too is that, you know, we will have to have some community effort to identify photos. I'm hoping that we will be generous with royalties, not tonight, no, okay, so, but, there are people in the community who donated photos for the open space plan. Some of the photos were purchased.
I'm hoping we wouldn't have to do that, but good photos make such a difference.
Yeah.
Some of what I'm
Is there any
saying,
reason not to put that call out pretty soon?
there's no reason at all, other than, you know, we didn't know until Tuesday that this was moving forward, but yes, we should get the word out. Some of what I'm saying is that all of their policy stuff, so where they've got the topic and the action and who's going to do it, that starts on page 8 and it ends on page 22, and then it's done.
yeah.
And think of how many pages of that sort of stuff you've been grinding through. Yeah, so they've managed to distill it. I just don't think that we'll distill it. So other things, reactions to things you like, maybe I can send out links to these and to other plans and just take feedback initially, but if there was any kind of direction that I could give her.
The fourth one on the list that you showed us second was way too dense.
Fourth one.
So I would just
Fourth
eliminate.
one
I wouldn't even send
was that,
to that one. Yeah,
yeah,
no,
not this one? Or maybe it was in Heinsberg's?
wait, where's,
Heinsberg is the 1/3, 2/3 sort of.
sorry, I don't know, never mind, ignore me. I trust Maya to,
This one doesn't appeal to me personally, which, this is Heinsberg?
Yep,
yeah, it's hard to look at.
and we don't want to look just like them, right?
I do like the idea of having an intro that is inviting and,
Yeah, this also seems really dense.
well, to some
But that's-
degree, we need to
so it's
have the
landscape,
density.
but it's effectively like just it comes it folded, and then it's like a little booklet.
I think so.
Yeah,
Ours wouldn't be able to be a booklet.
This one's 11 by 17, right, Dean?
I think it's 11 by
I
17.
mean,
it must
proportionally,
be,
it looks like.
yeah.
I think it might be interesting to see with the drafts that we have, or with all of the sections that we have alpha drafts of. So all of the edits and strike throughs and all that have been taken out. And then we can estimate how big transportation is, but like a rough page count just of the text we have. Because if that ends up being 100 pages or more, I mean, we're going to kind of be limited to certain formats. Because I don't think we can just publish this giant thick volume, right?
Well, when in her agreement with Essex, it was originally scoped out as 100 pages with there being a bigger fee if it went over 104. something about, her costs and her layout. I'm trying to think about exactly how many pages it ended up being. It's going to be a target, until you got it all out. But yes, when we have the complete list, we can do a word count.
Yeah, okay.
I remember her talking too about pricing, right? Like at 100 pages or 150 pages, bound looking glossy at night, like it's an expensive book.
The document itself, and that's a whole other
Yeah.
Fight to have, and yeah, we're not counting on her to do any of the printing. That's a separate hurdle to clear.
So the idea of having an intro that's colorful and that, and then maybe we have sections that are more just text-based and reference. Kind
That
of
sounds good to me, yeah.
sprinkle some pictures in as needed.
Because you do want to get to the text eventually. I mean, you don't
Yeah.
want to be like sorting through all these pictures that you might not necessarily want to see just to get through the text.
Right.
So I like having the photos toward the beginning,
Yeah.
and then it gets to the meat.
Is that enough to start with? Or are you looking for?
I'll send out an email and ask for some reaction individually to me about what I'm
Okay.
hearing and how I think I might pose it to her. I may also just talk to her some more and see what reaction she
She'll
has.
have ideas, like,
Yeah.
every time it
Yeah.
says goals, it's in a block color or something.
Yeah, I mean, she has said it's fine to give her copies of 3 different plans and say, well, we like this from this plan, and we like that from that plan, and that from some other. And the other thing she said too, and I didn't download examples of her own work, but if we could, I'll send links to her things on her website. She's suggesting that if there's something that she's already done, then she may be able to work on that more quickly. So there may be elements of reports that she's done for other clients.
It's a good starting point for that, though. We can.
I think enough,
Yeah.
especially in light of the time.
Okay. So then, Commissioner questions and comments? I was just going to call out that I did go this morning. There was the site visit to Quiniesca in preparation. The Act 250 hearing happened right after that. I couldn't attend that, but it was a great walkthrough. The golf carts went around and they pointed out where the new holes were going and what was going to happen, and the Act 250 commissioners were there. And based on the last discussion that we had with them and the maps that were shown and the concerns from the neighbor that was there, it looks like they really went out of their way to readjust so that that area along that fence line was not impacted.
That's nice of them.
Yeah, it looked like they really did a lot there. I'm not sure what happened in the hearing, and I suspect that there might have been some discussion around some wetlands consideration, but
Yeah, I had every intention of popping in for a little bit, but never got out of the meetings that I was scheduled for to do that. But did I forward to you the comments from the Agency of Natural Resources, to the planning commissioners? Because I know I had sent them to the Natural Resources Committee. I'll send them if I didn't send them to you. You're right. They really did adjust their plan in response to the neighbors and to resource agencies. But you're right. The wetland site visit will take place on May 15th. So the hearing was held, and the hearing hasn't closed. It'll allow the Agency of Ag to get comments in, because I think they were waiting for some information. There were a couple of other agencies that sent in comments lately, but you're right. They pulled things back from the property boundary. They pulled away from wetlands. They limited their impact on stream corridors. There's basically one area, there's a 50-foot buffer along the stream, and there's only one area where there's an encroachment, one hole, and it's also underneath a utility corridor or something like that. So the resource agencies don't look at it as an addition. But it's quite a bit reduced from the first version.
yeah. All right, then any other business or correspondence before we adjourn? All right, then a motion to adjourn. Excellent. Second. Moved by Kate, seconded by Andrew.
So we're going to try to schedule a meeting to talk.
All in favor of adjourning?
Oh, I thought you did, man. I thought there was like,
Now we're good.